And the amount of experts that have had to walk back their comments over the course of the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, people talking about Saquon not being up to snuff, people talk about Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl MVP, not being the same quality in the same league as all these other quarterbacks. The amount of people that have had to walk back all those comments right now is the most poetic and the best thing. My algorithm is literally just feeding me this nonstop, and I am drinking it in. I am loving it.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate. Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, welcome to episode 84 of Drunk Real Estate. I am Kyle Wilson, Ashley Wilson's husband, and the Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl 59 champions. I didn't know if it was going to happen, but it happened. I have been drinking all week. I'm drinking till the parade's on Friday. I'm wearing Eagles gear every day. I went in my daughter's school to read today. All I did was talk about the Eagles, wore my Eagles jersey. I'm pretty excited. Jay, how about you? You excited?
I have been listening to you talk about football now for going on 25 minutes. So the last thing I am at this moment is excited.
Wow. Debbie Downer over there. At least you're going to have a drink so you could perk up a little bit.
I am going to have a drink. In fact,
he's just upset. He's upset that he didn't get to talk about his Costco story. So now he's going to have this
I know. He's so mad. He's mad at you though, Marisa. You're the one who shut him down.
I was going to tell my Costco story, and Mauricio didn't want to hear it. So maybe next week. Sorry, everybody listening. This week I'm going a little different. This week I'm going with the Bordeaux. I don't normally drink Bordeaux's. I don't even know what Bordeaux's are. I mean, I know what they are, but I don't know what they taste like. So wish me luck.
Bordeaux's are like the definition of what real wine tastes like.
I know. I've never been. I drink Napa wine. I don't drink much from overseas.
Fruit bombs, Jay. We know you drink fruit bombs. That's all right. There's nothing wrong with that.
Hey, as long as it gets you there, right? Mauricio, so are you back on the wine train? Or are you sticking with the brown stuff?
I'm really enjoying this High West single malt thing, and I'm almost getting there.
Just keeping it on your desk now, huh?
Yeah, I just keep it on my desk, and it's been a long day, so I'm like, man, I need a drink, and I just figured a stiff drink. Plus, it's nice. I have a couple sips and then loosen up because I got an interesting topic that I'm responsible for, and so it's gonna be good. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. I'm excited. I wanted to celebrate with you. I'm happy for you.
Thanks,
unlike
man.
Jay, who doesn't want to talk about it, I'm happy for you. I support you. Go Eagles.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, and I like the fact that you're excited for your topic. This is kind of a new thing for you. I'm excited.
I'm ready to go.
And Tony Montana down there showing a little chest hair, cuffs out. I love it, buddy. How you doing, AJ?
I'm doing good. I'm bringing the spirit of Tony Montana here. Say hello to my little friend with my red cup and Diet Coke. I don't think that's probably the same Coke, but you know what? I'll take mine.
Well, I'm sure Tony Montana didn't even have an Ernie in his office, so you got one up on him. Well, I'm not even going to make jokes about it. I have a koozie that's an Eagles koozie, so that's why I picked it, and I had to pick something that fit in it, and my buddies who are also Philadelphia-based company, a little clear rum, throwing it right in the Eagles koozie, keeping it rolling, guys. Keep it rolling. Wake up, Eagles.
You know what they say, Kyle? You know what they say? Don't detox, retox.
Yeah, you can't get hungover if you just stay drunk. So anyway, let's talk about Mauricio's topic here because he's a little bit excited. We're going to talk sovereign wealth funds, and this would never have been an interesting topic. They've been around forever. Tons of countries have sovereign wealth funds until last week, an executive order was signed with the intention of creating a sovereign wealth fund for America. As I said, many other countries have these wealth funds, and it would allow us to invest in public markets and even private companies such as, any guesses? TikTok. TikTok's been brought up that we could possibly buy TikTok if we had a sovereign wealth fund. So critics of the fund are obviously saying that a wealth fund, you need to have wealth, which we have a $35 trillion debt. So Mauricio, why don't you break this down for us a little bit, this sovereign wealth fund, and whether it's something we should even consider or we can do, or what the deal with it is?
This is hands down the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is like did zero prep. I have zero.
I did
prep
not
on
see
this.
that coming.
Zero prep on this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. First of all, let's define what a sovereign wealth fund is, right? It's a investment firm or investment fund that is owned by the government. When was the last time you saw something that was run by the government that was run beautifully and effectively and profitably? Like
Actually, Mauricio, there is a poster child for this, and if you look at all the sovereign wealth funds, the top ones, obviously you have like the Saudis and China, and you can't really use those as poster childs. But then right at the top's Norway, and they've been doing a great job. Their sovereign wealth fund, they're very transparent. You could go online to their sovereign wealth fund, and you know how like we have that debt tracker of like where it's a constant clock of our debt rolling and how much debt we have. They have the same thing for their sovereign wealth funds. So their constituents can go online and just watch the country's wealth grow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's wealth. Like you brought it out. Like all of these countries that have sovereign wealth funds, it's a mechanism for them to invest their surplus. Now, I know we probably are not familiar with this term surplus because we haven't had one in a very, very long time. We have $36 trillion in debt, and we run a deficit every year of about $2 trillion. We have a trade deficit that's off the chart. All of these other countries, most of them have, number one, a lot of natural resources, either it's oil or some other gold or whatever, or they have a huge trade surplus like China. So they've got all these extra dollars that they got to figure out what to do with. And so they're using that extra surplus to, hold it while they don't need to spend it or whatever. We don't have that. We are in debt. Like we would literally have to go and get more debt to invest in the wealth fund. Like we don't have any money to put in the wealth fund. We would have to go borrow more money, add to our $36 trillion debt in order to get this thing going. So that's number one. Number two, you mentioned let's just get this thing up. You mentioned an executive order. This is this needs to be approved by Congress, right? So this executive order is simply an order instructing his people to go put a plan together and see if it's a good idea. But ultimately, they're going to have to go to Congress to create the sovereign wealth fund and fund it and all that stuff. And
I think fund it, right? That funded is the thing that they would have to go to Congress would have to approve funding.
It's an executive press release.
Yeah, executive press release. Don't forget also that all of those countries that you just mentioned, well, Norway maybe not, but like, the Saudis, the Chinese, these are not capitalist democratic. These are countries that are, a lot of these are communist countries, which is having the government control the means of production and making investments and picking winners and losers is not a capitalist tenant. It's a communist tenant. And most of these wealth funds are created by countries that don't necessarily have a capitalist view or what have you. So the list of countries that we have is not something that I would really hang my hat on. We don't want to be competing with our own guys. Like, why should the government be entering markets? Like even TikTok, which by the way is not going to happen because a sovereign wealth fund is going to take a year or so to put together, and TikTok needs to be done in the next 60 days. But even if it was, why are you crowding out private investment? Why are you competing with the private markets? Like I can't compete. Like the sovereign wealth fund is going to start buying real estate and it's going to crowd me out. I won't be able to even buy stuff. I mean, we don't want the government competing with the private enterprise.
We actually had that, and we got in a fight with the state, and we ended up buying real estate assets and everything off of them because our state went and bought private real estate. They had to off-board them. Afterwards, we got a bunch at a really good price, but stupid is an understatement.
Yeah. And then do you really want not only picking winners and losers, which I think we all agree is a terrible idea, but then what are the odds, do you think, of corruption, conflicts of interest starting to come up with a thing? It's off the charts, right? I mean, you don't hear about that in these other countries. You think the Russian sovereign wealth fund is not playing favorites with their people and the oligarchs and this and the other?
That's how real oligarchs happen.
Technically, though, like if you I came into this topic thinking I was going to have to take the side of how dumb this was, but now I feel like I have to take the other side of it. Technically,
there is no other side, Kyle. It's just dumb.
The other side, like there wouldn't be other side of it if there haven't been good examples. And I'll bring up Norway again, just because they're literally the biggest sovereign wealth fund. They're $1.8 trillion, and they have
excess reserves. They have money.
Norway has a budget surplus every year, and their debt to GDP is 44%.
Okay, well, but let's focus on one aspect at a time. One aspect at a time is corruption, right? So you brought up corruption, and there is a way of running it without corruption. You have to keep it as an independent. It's the same thing with the Fed. It would have to be a non-government affiliated, run by a separate. There's a CEO of the Norwegian hedge, or I call it hedge fund. It's basically a hedge fund, but the wealth fund, and he runs it. And they actually in Norway, and I watched an interview with the CEO, and he was kind of ticked off about it. But they don't allow investments in private companies. It's only public companies. And actually, this Norwegian sovereign wealth fund owns 1.5% of all public companies. Like across the entire world, they own 1.5% of it. It's crazy, and they're very successful. So like you can do it. It's just, what is the purpose of this wealth fund? And that's where it gets back to
what end? Because if you're buying it, that is taking it from the private market. And the bigger they get, they don't have to deal with taxes like we do. They don't have inheritance. They don't have all of these things the private sector does. So there is an eroding effect on the private market that does not exist within that. So it can compound regardless of time. Therefore, always securing more of the private market.
At the same time, we have a problem in that we are a quote unquote wealthy country, but we're not wealthy. We have negative money, and we have all these assets, and yet we are. If you looked at the country as a whole, as a company or just a person, they would be considered poor. But no one would say the United States is poor. So we have a problem, and we need to get out of that problem. And I can't knock him for trying to get out of the problem. And he's thinking like a real estate investor, right? Like the way we think of it, we don't go and buy an apartment building and put no debt on it. The reason we put on debt is we want to take that other money that would be used to buy that apartment and go buy more assets and go buy more assets.
But they should give it to the private sector and stop spending money.
If you can get money for 5% and go and find somewhere where it's going to get 10, 15%, then that's a good investment strategy. And so I get where he's coming with thinking, but
where's the government getting money at 5%?
Well, so they hinted at it, and everyone's speculating. So they hinted at it that like we have all these assets basically that we would use them. And someone was like, okay, how would you use them? Well, first of all, you could collateralize assets like national parks and monuments and things like that. You could but that would be basically taking out more debt, as Mauricio's point.
And who's taking the debt out? Because if so, I would really like to take the debt out on Yellowstone, seeing how it's right next to me. I would absolutely love to close on that.
But another aspect that people are talking about is just selling American assets. If you want to look at, like, we talked about possibly doing a topic on this, and then we kind of shot it down. But there were comments about all the office space that the government owns and currently has tenants, and they're very underutilized. They're basically half the government staff has been working from home, and they own all these office buildings that they could just sell. They would basically go through their balance sheet and say, okay, where could we trim stuff? And instead of just selling it and paying off some of our debt, we could take this and we could put it into a fund, and we could grow our wealth that way.
Well, let's talk about whether that's smart. Let's shrink this whole thing down to a scale that we can all probably appreciate. And I'll stick with numbers that are at scale to the real numbers. So I come to you, Kyle, and I say, hey, I'm in a little situation here. I've got a family of 300 million. I'm sorry, a family of three. And I've got
Jay, you've been busy, buddy. Yeah, boy.
I'm trying to make the analogy a little more clear. So I've got this family of three. I make $50,000 a year, and I've got credit card debt of $75,000. So I'm making $50K. I've got credit card debt of $75K. That $50K is just enough to cover my mandatory expenses. It's just enough to cover my food, my shelter, the gas I need, the clothes I need. So I don't even have extra money for discretionary. If I want to go to the movies or go out to eat or anything like that, I'm going in more debt. So
and you also have a brother who keeps asking you for $5,000 a year, and you keep lending him $5,000, even though you're already in debt $75,000.
Yeah, 100%.
And he's personally guaranteeing your loans, Kyle.
100%. Now you're like, oh, that is a bad situation. But I say, but wait a second. There's a bright side. I just sold some office space. I had some office space, and I didn't get a lot of money for it, but I got $10,000 for this office space. What do you think? Should I take this? Oh, and by the way, don't forget that my credit card has told me that my interest rate's going up next year too. So I'm going to be paying more interest on that next year. So I get this $10,000, and I come to you, Kyle, and I say, should I spend this $10,000 to pay down some of my debt? Or should I go out and buy some Meta stock and some Tesla stock and some TikTok stock? What would you recommend I do with that $10,000 if I were that much in debt with that little income?
I see what you're saying, Jay, but if that debt was only at 5% and you could invest it the same way that apparently, I don't know, Nancy Pelosi can pull off as a government official, if you could get some sort of investment strategy like that, then I would say actually that's probably a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, if you can borrow money at 5% and invest it in TikTok, that's going to make 100x. Is that a bad investment?
Well, let me point something else out. Let's say I don't sell office space. Let's say I have to borrow money. I'm going to go back and I'm not going to use an analogy anymore. So let's say the government decides we need to start a sovereign wealth fund and we need $5 trillion to buy TikTok or $10 trillion to buy TikTok. And they say we can make a lot of money by buying these companies. So it's worth it for us to print an extra $5 or $10 trillion, basically borrow into existence an extra $5 or $10 trillion. Here's the problem. That money that you're borrowing into existence is money that is now owed to the Treasury by the taxpayer. Any revenue that's generated by putting it in a wealth fund and the wealth fund growing belongs to the government. So the debt we create is taxpayer debt, but the benefit we get from it is government. And there's no guarantee the government's going to say, okay, we're now going to use any gains to go back and pay off the debt. They may use the gains to make another investment. They may use the gains to...
For wars, bombs.
Exactly. So they're borrowing money on our credit card, but we don't get any benefit. Well, we may not get any benefit of the actual equity that it grows into.
Let me give an example here. So you have the United States government, right? And they shouldn't compete in private markets. And then you have the private markets. That's it. No, they shouldn't do it. They shouldn't own assets. They shouldn't compete. It's like, it's laughable. It's not. I don't agree. Sovereign wealth funds with other countries, right? Even most of the ones that exist are literally just these.
Well, so AJ, then let's say hypothetically, we did run a surplus. We all of a sudden we found what's the adamantium or whatever the Marvel substance that they found under Wakanda, and we all of a sudden were like a huge surplus, and we had all this money. Would you say it made sense then to have a sovereign?
No,
wealth
you
fund?
want to know why? Because we have atomic bombs that we will go take it, and if anyone tries to stop us, we will blow them up. So there's no reason for a sovereign fund. We did that with oil. It's once again, I think it's just kind of like a ludicrous thing to think that the government should be going and interjecting themselves and manipulating markets, especially the United States government. Now, if there are natural resources, the government should go give them a little spirit of democracy and capitalism and let markets go in and take care of it. And they should protect the markets, but they shouldn't be the ones that are buying it. They should just liberate the people and allow us to create the capitalism.
And liberate the people. I mean, if there is truly like just the concept of a sovereign wealth, if there is excess cash, assuming there's a surplus for whatever reason, why not give it to the people? Like, why not like reduce the taxes or eliminate? Like, I remember Venezuela did a good job. Venezuela, not a great example for most things, but Venezuela, I don't know if it's still true today, but like, you know, big oil country, they used to have their gas prices were like 15 cents a gallon. They would subsidize the gas prices because they had all this oil. So they would basically pass those savings along to the people. Like, if you have excess money, then why not just give it? It's like if you have a corporation.
Idaho did. They sent taxes back. We had surpluses that were way bigger. They sent them back.
I don't want to get too in the weeds, but technically that would, like, if you have such a surplus, if you are so rich in commodities, then you kind of have to set up something like that. Otherwise, it tanks your economy because it's a whole economic process. But basically, your economy becomes too dependent on that one actual resource, and so the rest of your economy stops working. So like if you could pay all of your debts and do all these things with this one resource, then you don't need the other stuff, so the rest of your economy actually stops working. So that's why someone like Norway, they basically siphon off the proceeds from their natural resources so that the rest of their economy can keep working. So there's that other thing. But we don't have to worry about that in America, obviously, because
not to steal Kyle's top 10 for later, but if you look at the top 10 nations by sovereign wealth fund, the size of their sovereign wealth fund, 8 out of the 10 have a debt to GDP of under 50%, and most of them have a budget surplus at the end of every year. The only 2 that don't have debt to GDP of under 50% are China and Singapore. And those are 2, as AJ nicely put it, they're socialist countries. They own a lot. They nationalize a lot of their businesses, and they control those businesses.
And who knows what their real numbers are?
And who knows what their real numbers are?
And who knows the corruption and stuff that goes on in those countries?
Yeah, look at what happened in Malaysia there. Like
a lot of those countries also, and keep this in mind, we have term limits, right? So imagine whoever's running the sovereign wealth fund, they've only got 4 years guaranteed, maybe 8 tops. They're going to make short-term decisions versus somebody like Russia, China, even Norway. I just looked it up. I didn't know it was a monarchy. So there's a king in there that's been there since 1991. Like they have a lot, they're in it for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They can make long-term investments. But if you're the president of the United States and you're like, well, I've only got 4 years, I want to make sure the sovereign wealth fund, I'm going to be putting it in like Bitcoin and TikTok as opposed to long-term.
As I said, to defend sovereign wealth funds that are run properly, they are separate from government. You have a separate person running them, a separate whole function is that is their job, to run the wealth fund that is separate from government. But
let me guess, will that person be Elon Musk?
Well, I hope it's somebody better than that. I don't know if his investment strategy is the best for a holistic long term.
What if the sovereign wealth fund invests and buys the Kansas City Chiefs, who then they just spend all this money in the world and become the greatest NFL team of all times, and the Eagles never win a Super Bowl ever again?
I mean, I don't think that's a very good analogy, considering if you look at the growth in value of NFL teams over the last just 10 years.
I love how Kyle's taking this so seriously. He's like, I'm coming back with a serious rebuttal here.
As a franchise investment, this one is already seasoned out. Like it's already peaked out. Eagles is on the way up. There's a lot more yield in that investment.
Plus the government can't buy a sports team right now because I hear that there aren't going to be tax breaks for sports team owners, and there's no way the government's getting in that situation.
A lot of sports teams lose money, but they've still gone up 10x in value. I'll just say that. But I guess the consensus on the panel seems pretty clear that this is not a good idea. But the question is, so I want to bring it back though. The question is, can this get done? And even if it can get done, is there any chance that it will?
Nope.
Double no on those?
I disagree. I think it can get done. It's just how many House of Representatives.
I agree. I think there is a path to convincing enough people to get this passed through Congress.
You want to know why? Because all of these politicians are owned by the private sector. And all of these politicians will have their lobbyists and donors and everybody else saying, are you kidding me? You're going to start siphoning money from my investments, driving up assets, everything else. We'll put you out of office if you do that. And so the private sector will destroy the politicians if they do. And they are all bought.
There's no way Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are going to be able to go to the pharmaceutical companies and be like, hey, why don't we create a sovereign wealth fund and invest in our own, vaccines or whatever?
Yeah, they'll never get a donation again.
Mauricio, I'm actually glad you brought this up, because this is kind of a side note, but it's also, we talked about how you're going to fund this. And there is a scenario where you don't have to fund this. And the scenario is, and it was brought up during COVID, when all of a sudden we were buying these billions of dollars of vaccines. And the comment was made like, hey, if we are going to do this massive contract with Pfizer, we should get some equity in this company. And I like, it was an interesting concept to me, but if you go through the whole thought experiment, like that's a slippery slope as well, though.
I agree with, so the thought experiment of we fund and we get all the downside, but we get none of the upside. So we're essentially, what we are doing, these pharmaceutical companies during COVID, everything else, it was taxpayer funded and we took on the debt and they received the upside. So first and foremost, I'm just against that. That was the biggest sham ever. Trillions of dollars that were siphoned off of taxpayers and into the private sector's hand through force and manipulation, right? Huge scam.
But wait a second. Just to make this clear, we do the same thing with farmers. We do the same thing with oil companies. We do the same thing with lots of private industry in this country.
No, there's a difference. We do in other industries. There is a difference between giving tax credits and actually paying and forcing selection amongst one or two. So farmers, they all get the tax distribution, which, by the way, I'm against that too. I think us subsidizing farmers, wait, I can't say that. My family will kill me. Never mind. So I think that needs to be put into question. I am absolutely,
especially certain farmers over others. My wife would get mad at me if she didn't point out that like the dairy industry and certain industries get a lot more subsidies than others.
Yeah. So but subsidies is still different. I'm not saying I agree with it, but it is different than picking the actual winner and then forcing it and mandating it. That is different.
And Kyle, I'm a little concerned. Wait, Kyle. Why are you so concerned about your wife getting upset at you? Like, this seems to be an issue that always happens. Like, you're always worried
the same
about
reason you are, Mauricio, whether you admit it or not.
Well, some of us like to plug their wife every night. So if you want that, then you're concerned about it.
I don't know about you guys, but my couch is not comfortable.
Exactly.
Actually, my basement's awesome, by the way. So like my wife never kicks me out of bed because she knows I would just be down in the basement loving life. But it is an interesting concept, though, that if we are going to be doing these massive government, like even like Elon Musk, like Starlink, like if we're going to be giving Starlink a massive contract, a government contract to be doing something, should the government own percentages of these things? But I guess the question is, if we start doing that, where does that lead? And then all of a sudden we have a bunch of state-owned.
Right now, 50% of the economy would be owned by the government.
Right.
Basically, we're talking about privatization, and privatization drives costs up. I mean, we imagine one of the things that the president is talking about using the sovereign wealth fund for is we have this merger between U.S. Steel is trying to be bought by Nippon Steel from Japan, and Biden blocked the merger, the buyout. Trump also blocked the buyout, but now Trump is saying, hey, maybe we use the sovereign wealth fund to kind of bail them out, and the government goes in and the government buys 50% of U.S. Steel. Well, then the problem is, do I want to open a steel company knowing that I'm competing with the U.S. government? Am I going to win if I'm competing with the U.S. government? And so basically we have no competition. And when you have no competition, what happens with prices?
Well, that's we're not going to get too into the weeds here, but it came out during the whole the Ukraine war with the whole military industrial complex and the cost plus model. If you want to get in the weeds, just look up military cost plus, and the fact that we basically, for the same bomb, it cost us $60,000 to produce this one bomb, and Russia was producing the same bomb for $600. So like that's just an example of what happens.
Another example is, I don't know if you guys seen the toilet in San Francisco example. I think they were talking about this in the All In podcast, but it was $1.4 million for one toilet to have a public toilet, when there was a contractor that said, we will donate everything. They were literally told it would not change the price, because the price of going through, getting the permits, installation, everything like that, that's what amounts to the $1.4 million. That is what happens when you privatize government things, that a toilet cost $1.4 million.
So I guess what we're getting to is all bad, no scenarios where this is good, no scenarios where they could get this started, no scenarios where they could get this funded. So
I'm pretty impressed that we just spent 25 minutes talking about a topic that we all agreed on. I don't think we've ever done that on this show.
And bashed on it. It was really fun, guys. This was just like a great gang beating here.
I feel like you could just say how good of a moderator I was, that I stepped in and actually put some other side of the vote on this just so we could have something to discuss. But you're right.
I almost went with a top 10. Like, here are the top 10 reasons why this is the dumbest idea ever, and see if you guys disagreed with any
You
of
should
my
have done that.
Which one's actually the dumbest part of it?
Here's a fun fact. If you're looking at the top 10 sovereign wealth funds by country,
Why are you ruining my top 10 again, Jay? Like,
so because this is
Don't you look at the Google sheet, Jay, and know?
I have not looked at the Google sheet all night.
That's the problem. You should check
you
out the
literally
Google
said
sheet.
earlier, not to ruin Kyle's top 10. And
I was joking. I actually had no idea if that was your top 10, but I don't know if this was the same top 10 you looked at, but the number 10 on that list is the United States. And so you might be asking, where did the United States get a sovereign wealth fund? The reality is
Alaska. Is it Alaska?
Alaska. So several U.S. states have their own sovereign wealth funds. And
so
Alaska
there's Wyoming, which pays for schools, and their schools are amazing.
And so Alaska has a very large one.
Yeah. So, Jay, I think you might be looking at an old one, though, because they're no longer in the top 10.
Yeah, but that's a good example. Like, Alaska does have a lot of oil, and so they actually, I think did have some surpluses and place to put their surplus.
And once again, as I said, there's a very good reason for creating a sovereign wealth fund if your economy is very rich in one resource. Okay, let's talk about something else crazy. How about we talk about Javier Milei, guys? Because Trump's inauguration, a flurry of activity in the first couple of weeks. No one was really aware or paid attention to the fact that the World Economic Forum was having their annual meeting in Davos. Usually that's something people like to talk about, joke about, make memes about. Didn't even come up. But it did happen. And one of the most talked about figures at that conference was Javier Milei. They actually let him speak this year at the conference, and he's the president of Argentina, who he's made some incredible changes in his country. He's only been in there for a year. And since taking office, he ran on staunching inflation, cutting federal spending, and improving the economy. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone. Obviously, since he's running on basically the exact same thing at Trump is, he was kind of like labeled as a bit of a MAGA hero. All of the MAGA types, they were all looking at him as a poster child for what can be accomplished. So while Argentina's economy looks to be doing much better, many are questioning his methods and how he got there in such a short amount of time. So AJ, my question to you is this guy Milei, is he actually a hero for Argentina?
I think Milei represents a lot more. It's a change in a complete view of how the world is governed. And I think this is a broad trend that we have seen, that you're seeing this not just in South America, not in America, and not just in the United States. We have seen a shift towards this thinking in other countries, including in Europe as well. And this is a very different idea and ideal of how we should be governed. And this has been something that has been really born out of necessity, where the results for the debts and what we pay, our taxes, everything, have just gone away. It's diminished. And inflation really put kind of a pin in it, where that inflated assets, the rich got richer, and the governments were printing, governments bloated, and everybody felt like they were left behind. And that was really kind of the spark, right, that happened. Now, a lot of it was theory. So when it first came out, of course, you had the right that said, oh, he's going to cut government. That's amazing. You had the left that says government's the only thing that can save us. This guy's the devil and he's going to be a Nazi, right? And then it was everywhere in between. But nobody really knew. It was either he is some government cutting savior or he is a Nazi that wants to end the government, which is what will save us. It was just noise. No one really had anything kind of tangible to see what would actually happen. The speed at which he went, I think, is the actual textbook for Trump. I think he literally met with them, and I think he told Trump, do it fast, and do not listen to your critics. And I think that's one of the reasons why this is so important to understand, because I do think that Trump is mirroring a lot of what's going on. Now, there's a few things that I think they've seen in Argentina. First of all, I think generally speaking, the reason why I spoke at Davos and wasn't invited before and was this, pariah, but now it's changed, is because the results have been staggering. In fact, they were a lot faster than I think he or anybody even thought that they would happen. They had been caused a lot of noise and was violent, but even, mainstream media. So I've got some stuff to show here so we can kind of go through. So first of all, the government federal spending, how it's affected on interest rates and core inflation. I really like this chart. You're all seeing it, right? Want to make sure. For a few reasons, mainly because I made one that's exact same in the United States a few months ago, which we're going to show. It is wildly different than this. So what had happened, as you can see, we saw he came in and basically for this particular means, which we're going to get into, also real estate, fascinating. We'll talk about real estate in just a second. That's incredible what's kind of gone on there. But GDP's grown, inflation's down, their bond yields, their interest rates are down, and their people are buying up their bonds because they've regained faith in the country. And they were really in a really, really bad spot. They have poverty rates now starting to drop, which spiked. Of course, I'm surprised that's even happening. I didn't think that.
Whoa! Where did you see that? Poverty rates started to drop.
They started to drop in the fourth quarter of 24.
In 1 month? Like what? You see 1 month down? Because I have some very different numbers.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. Hold on. So on this one right now, what we're looking at is the core inflation, how it's come down, the 12-month GDP cumulative as a percentage rising. All right. That chart that we just showed in relationship to the United States, which this was built out. I built the same chart. Okay, there. Can you see that? Okay. So I built this chart, whatever it was, 4 months ago or 3 months ago. No, not even. Wow, 2 months ago. Basically looking at the effect because interest rates went up to shrink the money supply, but when the Fed tightened to try to do that, we actually saw inflation come down, but it wasn't enough to lower interest rates. And the reason why, which is illustrated here, was the government spending was offsetting because it was so high that influx or that drop in money supply from interest rates. Now, not all government spending actually increases the money supply. That was taken into account here. There's only one subset of government spending that does. But as you can see that change and how it stagnated the inflation rate, as well as the Fed's ability to really start dropping interest rates. That is the inverse of what we saw with Argentina. So the chart before showed the exact opposite. They cut government spending. Not only did inflation come down, but they started dropping interest rates, which also then led to a spike in GDP growth.
What led to the drop? Directly led to the drop in inflation? Do you think
for Argentina?
Yeah,
it was counted as the government federal spending, which they cut in over 30%. Was one of the main drivers.
Can I guess what Jay is going to say?
Sure, go for it.
Are you going to talk about the devaluing of the currency?
No, not yet. I'm going to talk about the fact that we, back in September of this year, over half of all of Argentinians were in poverty. That's up from 10% in 2022. So how do you have inflation when half your country is in poverty?
Well, here, I'll put the real numbers on it. So it started before at about 41%. Were in poverty, and then it went up to 53%. But when he took over, but that's not the staggering amount one. The staggering one is indigent, and I kind of had to look up the definition because it's not really a track stack in the U.S. because this is people who don't have enough money to even survive. Like they can't buy food, and that's the term for it. And before Milei took office, it was 8.8% of Argentinians, which is a lot. That's 8.8% is a hell of a lot. Well, now it's 18%. So I guess when my point that I was going to make was like when you measure, a country is doing well, there's a reason that the Fed has a dual mandate. They don't just have a single mandate, because if they had a single mandate, they could keep inflation down all day, but they could, at the expense of running unemployment up to, as Jay's point, 50%. Is that a win? Or is the country doing well? And like, I guess that's something no one's really talking about here.
So, well, there's a few indications. First of all, their actual belief in the government in Argentina has skyrocketed. So the citizens there are bullish and they are happy with what's going on. So they believe in the reforms, not just the investment community.
According to whom? Who's doing this studies?
That was a Gallup poll. Let me pull that up for you.
And I'm not saying there's not polls that will say that. And the polls that I've seen are shocking, quote unquote shocking, because over 50% still believe in him, regardless of the fact that over 50% are now in poverty. And that's a testament to how bad it was before. But it's still not one of those things that, like, oh my God, everyone thinks this guy's a savior. 53% of the people are in poverty right now.
Yeah, but the question is, and of course, absolutely, there's not even, you'll never have everybody agree with it. They weren't in a good spot before. And two, they also knew and said there was going to be pain. I think I'm shocked that it even is better now. I did not think that you would start to see these key indicators increase. They've had a 40% drop in rental rates. So housing and rent has dropped 40% because they lifted the regulations and they onboarded over 50,000 apartment units. Let me pull that up. So it's trickling down. Now, once again, outside of this is all the way up until 20. So if you look at 24, it didn't really start to change until halfway through 24. I mean, this is like just barely changing. I didn't think you'd have any changes at all. I thought it would only get worse through 24.
And I'm assuming that when they quote these things, they're talking in real terms, right? Because you really have to make that distinction when it comes to Argentina, because what you'll notice is Argentina, when they're quoting numbers, they'll say our inflation's 2.7%. That's monthly. Their monthly inflation is 2.7%. So multiply that by 12, and that's the real inflation. Our monthly inflation is 0.2%. And when we get 0.3%, we're like, oh, geez, that's high. So like they're still 2.7%.
And that goes to my argument that, let's be clear. I think Milei has done an amazing job of balancing their budget. I'm not sure that what he did, and I'll talk about this more later. I'm not even going to say I think he did an amazing job of that. I think it was an immensely important job, and it's one that every country on this planet should be focusing on. But if you look at the relationship between balancing the budget and fixing the problems that they've had, I don't see a direct correlation. Their inflation is still over 30% a year, and yet they have a balanced budget. They have a surplus. They have a trade surplus, but they still have.
Yeah, but their inflation was over 200%.
Right. And so my point is there something else that's contributing besides just balancing the budget? And in my mind, it's the fact that we have 50%, 53% of the nation who literally can't spend money because they can't afford anything.
I don't have a problem with most of the things he did. The problem is he's a nut job. I feel like everyone who talks about him in a positive light has never watched him and his interviews and the things that he says. Like, they've only seen the clips of the things that he says that people want him to see. If you watch him in a full interview, the guy's, I mean, he ran carrying around a chainsaw. That was his banner, just walking around with a chainsaw. And like, he screams, he goes on tirades. He goes on misogynist rants. The guy is crazy. And so the problem is that it's not, you can't point at any single thing that he did as the problem. The problem is he did it all at once. You can't you can't make. I realize drastic measures had to be taken, but he could have spread this instead of doing it in 4 months. He could have done it over the course of a couple years, and he instead of just shutting everything off all at once, he shut off like all of the funding. Like when we talk about like that one time when Trump wanted to cut the federal funding for what was it for grants and all these things, and everyone's like, well, like what about all these different things? And they're like, oh, just kidding. Like, well, let's think about this again before we start talking about this again. And like, but that's what he just did. He had the power to do it, and he just did it. And so like all of a sudden he shut off like anybody on fixed income. They can't have any raises now. So even though inflation's going up 2.7% every single month, the fixed income, which is everyone on state pensions, is making $300 a month, and that is fixed. It's not growing. Any funding for any education, gone. Any funding for like cancer medications, gone. Like he just literally cut everything all at once. And it's all like when you say like, oh, it's going to be some pain, it's all the poor people pain is the problem. It's not like all the rich people are feeling all this immense pain.
What do you think poor people felt at 200% rent, inflation rate and rents that were over 40% above it? So when you're looking at the nation as a whole, first of all, I'm not saying there's not bad. They're way bad. The poverty spike, the rate, everything else. When we look at the Buenos Aires Times, though, they came out and talked about, and let me share this here, that the relationship of the poverty rate and how it's come down in the fourth quarter of 24. Open up here. Oh, hold on here. Because when you look at it all, once again, there's not bad. There's absolutely bad. Like, there's the poverty spike rate, everything else, which I think everybody talked about and they knew.
Like we talk about Trump eliminating some departments. He eliminated the department, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor, Science and Technology, Environment, Culture, Women and Gender and Diversity, Discrimination, Indigenous Rights. He literally cut every single agency that wasn't just like, it's literally like in a body, like he left the heart and lungs and just cut everything else out.
He cut 35% of all spending. Now, two, when you look at this, first of all, the sharp, people lost their jobs, right? I mean, there was huge shockwaves. Absolutely.
Like all at once too. All at once. Like it's not like a normal sane person would do this with a plan. They would say, this is how we would, this are going to be the second order effects of me doing this. And this is how we are going to mitigate these effects. He said, fuck them. We are going to just cut it day one. We're going to cut it right out. And whatever the bad effects are, we're going to feel some pain. That was just his thing. We're going to feel some pain. So people are going to have to deal with it.
And Argentinians, the majority agree with him.
Yeah. And I think that's important to me. Like, I'm not going to question, they elected him. He ran on this. They knew what he was going to do. And so elections have consequences and they'll live with this. Here's my bigger issue. My bigger issue, no matter how unhappy they are that they made the decision to elect them because they're living in poverty, they need to accept that if they think he's doing a great job, then they made a good decision. If they're not happy with their situation, well, they made a bad decision when they went to the polls. And so, I mean, that's no different than any other country. And again, and I'll let you finish before I jump in, AJ, because I'm not interested in talking so much about what he is doing in Argentina. I'm more interested in talking about your original point that this is kind of, people are thinking of this as a model for the U.S. and other countries. And that's where I have significant disagreement.
So first of all, there's no copy and paste of anything. But the key tenets of it, though, I think are absolutely true. And I think it shows out in the data, just like what we were showing.
What are the key tenets?
Federal government cutting, right? So vastly doing it. Our interest rates can't come down. Bonds are up because you have federal government spending that is so high. People don't want to invest, and it's really stifling economic growth. The government has overbloated, and
are we having issues with economic growth in our country?
Are we having issues with economic growth in our country?
GDP over the last 4 years has been at historic averages.
at government spending of 50%. So if you don't mind it not being the economy.
It's 33%, but I don't have the chart in front of me, but I'm happy to find it.
It has been 50% for 2 years. It makes up the vast majority of our economy. So if you look over the last 5 years, we had 2 years where it was literally 50%.
You might be lumping in some, like, not straight up government, like healthcare and stuff like that.
Like it's huge. So once again, the government's role in our economy over the last 15 years has grown dramatically.
So actually, according to Google, we're both wrong. According to Google, it's 23%, and out of the
well, state and federal is 36%, and what I was trying to get is, I think what AJ was, he was including government and healthcare spending, because healthcare it gets lumped in with government.
I can pull that stuff. I got to get that chart. I have all the government spending and allocation of not only just healthcare, but including state, federal, and everything in between. Hold on just a second. It's going to take me a minute. That's a whole nother thing, but I can pull it up.
I'll start while you bring that up. My point is that we are kind of lumping in. We're missing the nuance here. We're saying Argentina is having economic problems. We're having economic problems. Therefore, what they're doing is going to solve those problems. That's kind of like saying they have a brain tumor. We've got a heart murmur. We need a neurosurgeon because it worked for them.
No one said it'd solve all our problems.
Well, but the thing is, I don't think it's going to solve any of our problems, because the problems that they're facing are very different than the problems that we're facing. They were facing hyperinflation. We're not facing hyperinflation. We're not even facing inflation. Our inflation rate right now is historic average. And so that's not an issue for us. They were facing a super weak currency. Basically, they were pegging their currency at 200 Argentinian pesos to the dollar. The black market was selling at 1,200 Argentinian pesos to the dollar. So they've devalued their currency. If anything, our currency is too strong, so we don't have that problem. They had super weak GDP. Their GDP was negative 3-4% over the last couple of years. We don't have that problem. Our GDP is basically exactly where it's been historically. So we don't have, the only problem that we have in common with them is high debt to GDP and high interest payments. And guess what? They haven't solved that problem. The only problem that we have in common with them, they haven't solved. And so we could do we can't do what they did, because we can't devalue our currency. That makes no sense. Even if we could, we don't want to devalue our currency. We're not going to. I mean, I don't understand why we're even making the analogy, because it's a whole different set of problems. And again, if you look at it with no nuance and say their economy's bad, our economy's bad, let's just do what they're doing, that's fine. But we need more nuance than that.
I agree, more nuance, but I completely disagree. I think every government across the world, Ray Dalio talks about this a lot, the vast overspending of governments as economies start to fail and governments step in, the influx of government involvement into the economy to offset real returns decreasing in productivity. This is a problem that has been going on. This is not something that is not unknown. We've seen it. Developing nations, right? They have their problems, but nations that are big and cumbersome, we start to get an oversized effect by government spending. Because each dollar that the government spends is not a swap, it's magnified. Let me pull that up too. I actually have the equation of how much a dollar from government spent into the system is multiplied. So every dollar that spends, it's not like we just go a swap. A dollar that is created in the economy is not the same as a dollar that is invented over here and thrown into the economy. There's a multiplying effect to it. So it's an expansion of overall money supply. So when this happens, that government starts to exaggerate not only money supply, but its overall effects within the economy. This is a continual problem that we have seen. That creates nominal returns that are lower for market participants, individuals. There is asset inflation, right? This problem that we've seen with government bloating and spending, I think that is a perfect example. Now, it's true that no, we're not talking about all examples and it doesn't solve all our problems. We are the reserve currency. It's not the same, right? But there is the same effect on long-term interest rates, our overall viability, how much we depend on the government waste spending, taxation that is needed, and the long-term belief system in our economy. So the markets changed. So let me pull this up and we can actually look at how the markets changed its view in Argentina, which is an actual problem that we have because our interest rates can't come down and they haven't been coming down. Government spending has a direct correlation on our overall interest rates, particularly long-term bonds. And I think that this is important. There's also the deregulation part, which we can get into because that has to do with real estate. And there's an actual, I think, direct correlation, which I built out to show you compared to New York as well. Fascinating. And that's really, really cool. So let's look at this here. Search. Hold up. No, that's not it. Pull this back up. So I don't think it's solving all our problems. That's not what I'm saying or what I think at all. But I think there is absolutely.
What problems is it going to solve?
So I think, first of all, it will absolutely help us with interest rates and inflation.
We don't have an inflation problem.
We do at current interest rates. We cannot drop interest rates because inflation is too sensitive. The Fed has been very clear about this. So if inflation right now is not at where we want it, it's above, and dropping interest rates will inflame inflation. So they can't do it. Why?
Do you think dropping interest rates is going to drive mid and long-term treasuries?
No, we're talking about inflation.
You said bonds.
Yes, but I'm just talking about bonds as associated with government spending.
Well, but to AJ's point, though, if we were more confident with the inflation and us, like we still have that fear of inflation jumping back up, and that's what's keeping interest rates high because they know high interest rates would be needed to bring inflation back down. But if we had inflation, if we had accepted, if it was a general acceptance that inflation was under control and it's not a problem, then yes, interest rates would come down because there wouldn't be that fear of all of a sudden, we're all worried about the 70s where it's just going to run up to 10% again randomly.
The Fed's talked about this in like every single report that they've had because it's a big issue right now. Here, let me go in. So wait, which one am I hitting on first? Do we want to go on? Do we want to hit on, look at
this report. Jeez.
Yeah, I've got huge amounts.
Is one of your staff members doing their an intern doing their thesis on this, or what?
I actually have a third party that helps me compile different data sets. So we'll do it on an aggregate, but then we'll actually compile.
Now it makes sense. Now, like we're unfair advantage here, boys. All of a sudden, AJ's got a whole team of people working on getting the data for us, and I just got to do my independent research, listen to podcasts and YouTube videos.
AJ's got like a third party, and I've got like ChatGPT over here that I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Mauricio's looking up who is Javier Milei.
Why does Argentina have issues? Enter.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me get back on track of which point. Do we want to hit on the real estate point?
Sure. Let's do the real estate one. We might as well talk about real estate once during this podcast.
Let's not forget the name of the podcast. It's Drunk Real Estate. You guys have been trying to get away from that. Maybe we should rebrand the podcast, but it's Drunk Real Estate.
But here's the thing. Your argument is that that it's the deregulation that's been driving down prices in the real estate world. But why is that a better argument than the fact that people are in poverty? 50% of people are in poverty and they can't pay as much for rents. And what happens when there's less demand on rents?
At the end of the day, the problems that Argentina has are the same problems the U.S. would have if we didn't have the reserve currency. The reason, this is not a new thing for Argentina. Argentina has been in these issues for decades. And the problem is that they have, like a lot of the countries, they have monopoly money, right? They have soft currency. So when you start borrowing more money to help the country and it's not supported by economic gain, then your currency loses purchasing power. People, when you print a bunch of money, that decreases the currency's purchasing power, unless you're the reserve currency. Because if you're the reserve currency, you can get away with it. But if you're Venezuela or you're Argentina, you're all these countries, and you start printing money or borrowing money that you then can't pay back, so you have defaults and your currency goes back, you erode the purchasing power, which means that your prices for everything are going to go up. And that's been happening to Argentina for decades and decades and decades. The only solution to that, or not the only, one of the solutions to that is you go through austerity. And that's what's happening in Argentina. There's been a decision being made that in order for us to get past this devastating hyperinflation, because we've been printing all this money, and unlike the US, we don't have the reserve currency, so we don't have a demand for Argentina. Who here wants Argentinian pesos? Like if I have a bunch of Argentinian pesos, who wants it? Like nobody wants Argentinian pesos, and especially nobody's going to lend you in Argentinian pesos when I'm going to lend you money, and in 5 years you're going to pay me back in devalued dollars.
There's some demand now for Argentinian bonds, and there wasn't before. And it was Milei who did that. Before Milei, there was zero demand. There was no price.
Well, there was demand. There was just demand. You had to pay 20% interest rate, which nobody wanted to lend money on that. And now it's down to like 14%.
But that's not nobody. That's just somebody who's willing to take a risk at high interest rates in order to buy the bonds. And that is progress.
In order to get past that, one solution, and I'm not saying that's the only solution, but that's the solution that he's going with, is austerity. And we've had this issue before with the European, with Greece and everything. Like you either have to do something, right? And something that they've decided is the austerity, which causes poverty levels to go through the roof. Now they have come down.
And two, poverty levels didn't go up 500%. They went from 40 to 52%.
And now it's down to 34.
Exactly. So right now they're stating it's gone down already. So first of all, poverty did go up. Everybody knew it would go up, but it didn't go up 500%.
Yeah, but
Kyle, if tomorrow I said to you, dude, in the US, we have to have a balanced budget this year. It's next month. We have to have a balanced budget. The only way we're going to do a balanced budget is either we're going to raise taxes through the roof or we're going to have to cut Social Security. We're going to have to do something to have a balanced budget. There has to be some austerity if you're going to make that decision.
Okay, I agree, but there's a line though. Like what Milei did is he literally just cut everything day one. He didn't even think about what was going to be the downstream happens, and he just did it under the guise that as you're saying, oh, there's got to be austerity measures. So there's going to be some pain.
He actually didn't cut everything day one. He cut everything over the first year. But there is something he did on day one that's indisputable. And what that is he devalued the currency by 50%. And AJ brought up the chart earlier. I'll just kind of just talk about it. Basically, the month after he devalued the currency, inflation had its biggest single month drop in history. Devaluing the currency is what ultimately led to inflation starting to drop. And the reason for that is because Milei, like it or not, basically implemented an Argentina last policy. We talk about America first. They basically did an Argentina last. One, they devalued their currency by 50%, meaning
and ramped up all of their exports. So which obviously that's going to do great. Like your currency is worth less, but your exports, that's at the same US dollars.
So devaluing currencies often lead to inflation. And that's why they actually saw inflation spike. Devaluing currencies is normally a inflation.
If I'm correct, though, like I seem to remember the inflation only went up for a month and then it went down drastically because it was just a lag effect. But he did it right. If you're going to devalue your currency, then you want to heavily ramp up your exports.
That was the whole purpose.
You're bringing in higher dollar amounts from higher currencies.
He wanted to encourage globalization. He wanted to do the exact opposite of what we're trying to do in this country. He wanted to encourage other countries to come in and say, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I can buy stuff from you for really cheap and I can sell stuff to you for really expensive. And he did that because he knew if he could make it really cheap for other countries to buy and really expensive for them to sell, that they would come and they would say, hey, we want to do business with you. Because you're putting Argentina last right now, we're going to make lots of money. And so by putting Argentina last, and I'm just using the Argentina last because we use the America first thing, by putting Argentina last, by putting other countries first, basically he encouraged free trade and globalization with these countries, which allowed them to bring in a whole bunch of foreign currency. They were able to bring in dollars. They were able to bring in yen. They were able to bring in the yuan. They were able to bring in all these foreign currencies that they couldn't before because they didn't have enough trade. And basically those currencies were worth a whole lot more than their local currency. And now they have economic diversity and they have some level of autonomy where they can continue to run their economy as part of the world economy and participate because they have a wide variety of currencies in their central bank.
And so they devalued currency, which is an inflationary effect, but they offset it with business deregulation and cutting government spending, which equaled 45% of their GDP.
Absolutely. They stopped sending money to every one of their provinces. So basically, they said to all their people, again, Argentina last, they said, basically, figure it out. If we did that in this country, well, for the most part, the poorest states, and I hate to say it, but the red states, the ones that contribute the least to the government and take the most from the government, are screwed. And then the big states, and not just red or blue, I mean, Texas is one of those, but a lot of the blue states, which contribute the most to the federal government, are going to be just fine because they're generating lots of income. What he did was he just said, all the provinces.
But we have been devaluing our currency.
We haven't been, so.
What do you mean we haven't been devaluing our currency? We've been devaluing our currency, which is inflationary. See, this is the problem. You can't do those things. He said, we're already devaluing it. If we're going to devalue it, we have to increase. First of all, in order to decrease our overall interest rates to drive economic activity, 45% of the government spending has to be cut. We have to take in, which were those first two charts, which showed our problem in the United States. Because we didn't pair those things, we only did one, which doesn't work. You don't get that effect. It just props up the other one. So that's what they did. Now, you want to do, so most of those things are inflationary. They just are. Devaluing currencies are. So when you look at it, those things that are doing, and he was doing, crazy or not, I'm not saying what I'm saying. But at the same time, he went in and just slashed regulation, cut government spending. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. That is, though, what drove down inflation. And that's what increased the bond market, the stock market.
I think we all agree that's good. I don't think there's anybody that would say decreasing regulation and lowering debt.
And some government and cutting some government spending and some government bloat is a good
But you
thing.
can't devalue the currency and not cut the government spending when it makes up 45% of your total spending and not only runaway inflation, because that's what that's what was happening, because they were devaluing their currency and they were printing money. Then you can't have all those things. Like, I get this idea that we want to have everything and we do not want to have negative reactions. They had a 12% increase in poverty rate, which is already headed down. Outside that, they have already decreased rental rates on the market. They have increased GDP. They've increased salaries. They've increased all of these different things. The population overwhelmingly is the happiest they've been. That's the first time that they have a balanced budget in over a decade, and their bond markets are going up. So the country is way better off.
My biggest question is, if you think we should be doing what they did with respect to austerity, why don't you think we should be doing what they did with respect to free trade and doing what we did with respect to giving other countries better deals so that they'll do more trade with them?
What are you talking about, if I didn't think that?
So you hate the idea of reciprocal tariffs, countries that tariff us, we tariff them because we make it harder.
I hate tariffs, but reciprocal, we don't have what do you do? But I agree with NAFTA. I believe in free trade. I'm a capitalist.
Kyle, come on! I know the Eagles won the Super Bowl, but you got to take control and let's wrap.
Well,
this up.
they're making good points, but they're getting a little off topic here. And
so I guess here's my point. They're not. We have to bring manufacturing back to Argentina.
They're very different. They're a very different country, and their problems were very different than theirs. And when we try to pick and choose which ones apply to us, there's obviously a little bit of wiggle room as to was it this that effect, like cause and effect? There were so many things going on there. You can't pinpoint one single thing that the cause and effect was that single thing. So you could pull up any charts and you could say they did this and then this happened, but there's 8 other things that also could have potentially affected that.
So you don't think we can look at it and say these are the good things we should pull out and allocate?
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that when the reason there's going to be some discussion about it is it's a bit opaque. Like it's one of those things where we can speculate that this is the cause and effect things, but once again, he did so much so quickly that it's tough to say that a single thing led to a single outcome. And I guess that's why it's going to make it difficult.
I think it would be horrendous if we had a balanced budget tomorrow. We have mandatory spend. Basically, the federal receipts we bring in this country matches our mandatory spending. So we wouldn't have a single
Of course,
penny.
we can't flip a light switch.
But that's what he did.
That's what he did.
He did it over a year to cut it. I'm not saying you go and do it exactly like he did.
But
Right.
I thought you were.
Can we? All right. Can we just call a spade here? Can we call a spade? The reason why MAGA loves this guy.
As long as you're saying, as long as AJ's saying we don't go and do exactly what he did.
He's not saying that, and I agree with both of you on these things because I agree with AJ. A lot of his ideals and the things that he did are the right ideas and the right ideals. I don't think AJ you can argue with the fact he went way too far in a lot of things and he did it too quickly.
They're working. If you look at government data, if you look at people data, it's not working.
I'm going to have the last word. I'm going to just wrap it up with this, but we talked about it last week, but it just emphasizes this idea that there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs, and this is a trade-off. And so whether you like the trade-off or you don't like the trade-off, it's a trade-off, and that's just the way it is. There's no solution to this. You just got to figure out, what do you want? Do you want this or do you want that? There's no solution.
I know Mauricio wants top 10 for the first time ever.
Only if it involves the top 10 best Eagles performances in a Super Bowl.
I could pivot to that because I could just rattle those off at the top of my head. Number one with MVP Jalen Hurts, but it looked at Cooper DeJean with a pick six, so interception for a touchdown on the day of his 22nd birthday. So a rookie just turned 22, pick six in the Super Bowl. So if you want to talk about top of the world, I think he's probably top of the world there. Anyway, we're going to go top 10 sovereign wealth funds. And I think sovereign wealth funds, it's actually a good thing that this became a discussion point because no one really paid attention to them. And there's a lot of money in sovereign wealth funds. And I think we can go through this real quick. We talked about, we'll start right at the top. We talked about Norway because they're a good poster child of, there's a lot of, as Jay pointed out, there's a lot of countries on here who are not really democratic countries. Norway is, for the most part. And they have 1.8 trillion in assets.
And just to be fair, I think AJ made that point. So credit to AJ.
Sorry. 1.8 trillion in assets, which is they keep pointing out because they're not allowed to invest in private investments. They only invest in public investments, and they have 1.8% of all, or 1.5% of all public investments in the entire world, which is crazy. It's a crazy stat. They are the largest fund. Now, when I say they are the largest fund, that's only because China has two, and they have number 2 and number 3. They're at 1.3 trillion and 1 trillion. So if you add those two together, technically they would be above. And we already know China kind of does their own thing, and we don't even know that those stats are real, but they have 2 sovereign wealth funds because they do run surpluses. Then we have the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. We all know where that comes from, oil and gas. Just oil and gas funds.
And all of those are really democratic, right, countries? Capitalist, democratic.
I mean, is a king, if you have a king, is that democratic? What about a prince?
Yes, the king votes, and the 1-0 is the winner.
But we also can't argue that some of those funds do pretty well. And then if we go down a little bit farther, we have Singapore has a couple funds as well. If you put those together, totals over $1 trillion. Qatar, and then Hong Kong, and then we're back to China. So, as I said, if it weren't for Norway holding this whole thing up, it would be, kind of dodgy, the whole sovereign wealth fund. But Norway kind of takes the cake here. They do their own thing and they do it well. All right,
Plugs.
I'll go to Mauricio first. Mauricio, I feel like you got to talk a little bit, so let's get a plug out of here.
Dude, there's like all 3 listeners left. I don't really have anything to plug. I'm going to plug your wife. No, I'm not going to plug your wife, but your wife's going to be out here, I think, next week in SoCal for an event, a meetup. So if you guys are in SoCal and you want to hang out with Badass Investor, Ashley Kerr, myself, probably, Bethany LaFlamme, just, I don't know, DM me. I'll give you the details. It's in Irvine, California, next Wednesday.
Slide into Mauricio's DMs. He loves it. He actually responds. That's That's a. I mean, how many followers you got to this point, Mauricio? You only started like a year ago, right?
27.
Jay, what do you got?
I'm going to go with DRE Daily again. If you read DRE Daily, you know that pennies may be going away. Getting rid of the penny.
Let's all be upset about that.
We didn't talk about getting rid of the penny, did we?
Hey, actually, here's a hypothetical. I'll throw you. How many of you guys actually still carry like coins with you anywhere you go?
I don't even carry dollar bills.
I don't carry dollars either.
Yeah.
I carry hundreds. That's it.
I always keep a couple $100 on me. You never know. $100 bill gets you a lot of places, so it's always nice to have at least 100. I usually try to keep a couple hundred.
I keep several hundreds.
But I've just started this year. I started paying for everything with my phone. I pushed back on it for a while. I used credit cards, but then you get your credit card stolen a few times, and the protection of using your phone now is just a little bit better. AJ, what do you got for a plug?
YouTube. Go check out YouTube channel.
Oh, YouTube. I thought you said U2. I was like, the band?
At the Sphere. Go AJ at the
You're
Sphere.
a YouTube fan?
I'm not a YouTube fan. Sorry.
Man.
AJ jumped off the bandwagon when they forced the U2 album onto his iPod back in the day.
Yeah, that ticked me off. I'm like, freedom.
Were you one of the guys booing Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl, by the way, AJ?
I didn't see. I don't know.
Taylor Swift went from last Super Bowl, everyone cheered the moment they put her on, and then this Super Bowl, everyone booed when she won. And she was like, what is going on? It was actually kind of funny. I'm going to plug Badass Investor. Keep following her. She does cool, like going visits Mauricio every once in a while, does some collabs, goes and supports her friends. And yeah, her Instagram, YouTube, I just did a ton of recordings for her. I'm sure they're coming out in the next week. I was like her camera guy. So do me a favor and go watch them. So that, I feel like I actually did something meanwhile. Yeah, that's all I got, guys.
Next week, we get to talk about inflation.
Ooh, that'll be fun. And we also want to talk about ice raids. You're gonna let me talk about that, right?
Ice raids and inflation.
Baby.
There you go.
Ice baby. All right. Let's get out of here. It's been real. It's been fun. Hasn't been real fun. So I will see you next Thursday.